Hello, YouTubers, friends, compatriots, bootlicker shills, desolate search peasants, vassals, minions, meat sacks. I'm useful idiot. Welcome. And let's go to Iran. And this is the sixth and final part of a five-part series I did on banker scum. And for me, this is one of the more interesting parts of that series because we expect banker scum to be the places where we find them, the city of London, Wall Street, and the like. But one of the places you'd be surprised that there are banker scum is in Iran. And one reason why we do know they have banker scum is because there was a story a couple of years ago, and I did a video about it, that when they catch banker scum in Iran perpetrating any kind of fraud, they actually execute them there. So they take care of banker scum there. But what's interesting to find out is that one of the things that's a clue when looking around the world is not so much all the differences we find, but the similarities, and the fact that we have a rotten financial sector in Iran as well, in spite of the Iranian Islamic Revolution and the Khomeinis and the Ahmadinejads. We have a bloated and speculative banking sector, and it's come to the fore recently. There's been a couple stories because of the fact that now that the sanctions have been removed, some of the sanctions by the United States have been removed against Iran. They're starting to work with their banking system again, and they're starting to work with international rules, and they're concerned with integrating with the Basel 1, 2, and 3 agreements. So they're going to have to make some adjustments in their banking system because of this. But one of the things they're considering doing is creating a bad bank. And so the same thing that we see in the Eurozone, we see also potentially being used in Iran to solve some problems they have. They're creating a bad bank because insiders say that their non-performing loans are as high as 20% or more, and that 50% of the banks there are insolvent. So wow, does that sound familiar? And the biggest banks, of course, are the worst. And a lot of this were policies that were set up under Ahmadinejad. And as it turns out, there's a lot of insolvency in banks and bad loans. And they're concentrated to just 600 borrowers, apparently. At least according to this article, there's about 600 borrowers who are responsible for all this bad debt, and they're being protected. They're being protected by the upper classes. They're being protected by the likes of Ahmadinejad. And now that we have Rouhani in Iran and some attempts at reforming things in Iran, including the banking system, now they have to take a look at this, particularly if they're going to work with Western banks and somehow integrate their economy into the global economy. But I found it interesting to read that they quote have a bloated financial sector which has been thriving for years at the expense of a cash-strapped production sector. In recent years, the financial sector has mushroomed, engaging in more speculation than finance, unquote. So like I say, boy, doesn't that sound familiar? We have the Iranian banks essentially having their banks, in spite of this international isolation, their banks ended up the same way. So what does that tell us about the world? I think it tells us one thing that I've always felt, that there's a huge class war going on in the world, and the fact is that the elites are the same all over the world, and they have much more in common with each other than they do with their own people. And so we end up seeing the similar situations, these people in positions of power and access to money. We find the same forms of corruption. And so even in countries like China and in Iran, where theoretically they're more draconian, they're draconian up to a point. We have fat elites that get protected, and they get protected in Iran too. And they've got a lot to worry about economically. They have 40% inflation and a huge housing bubble. And so once again, we see this real estate speculation going on, and that went on in Iran as well. And then you have a 60% drop in oil revenue. And Iran is just now trying to get a lot more of its oil on the market, just at the point where there's the lowest prices for that oil. So So anyway, and then, like I say, they have something in the vicinity of 35 to 70 billion dollars in non-performing loans and bad loans, and that's what they admit to. So, like everywhere else, we can assume the Iranian banks are cooking their books, just like everywhere else, since they seem to have all the other issues that international banking system has. And so, well, what a surprise! So we have this supposed draconian Islamic fundamentalist government running Iran, and yet we find an economic model that's bordering on neoliberalism and all the problems that go along with it. So how about that? There we have it. In spite of everything, Iran has the same kind of banker scum we find all over the world. Banker scum in Iran, and at least when they catch him red-handed, at least they take him out and execute him. So I think there's something we could all learn there. I'm a useful idiot. Don't you be one too?